Hey, what's up, sports fans? Welcome to Common Sense Sports Talk. My name is Andrew Freeman, and in this video today, I'm going to be starting my 2019 NFL preview series where I'm going to take a look at all 32 NFL teams ahead of the NFL season starting up in a little bit over a month here. It's hard to believe that football's back already, but I'm really excited to get back in the swing of things here. It's been a long 6 or so months, and I'm just ready for football to be back. So what I'm going to do for this series is that I'm going to go division by division, starting in this video with the AFC East, and I'm going to take a look at every single team in that division. And how that's going to work is that I will look at each team's free agency period and what they did there. I'm going to look at their draft and kind of give you guys my general thoughts on how I think they did in that department. And then those will kind of lead into my overall breakdown of each team's roster and my overall thoughts for them before getting a look at the schedule, and then kind of giving you guys a range of what you can expect for each team to win. And then finally, my final prediction for how they will do record-wise in this upcoming season. Now, when I'm breaking down the rosters, I'm going to show visuals of my positional grades, my unit grades for this team, and the overall grade for each team. And if you want to see the standards for how I graded individual players, units, positional groups, and overall teams, you can check that out in the description below. But what I will say about how I went about that was I would go position group by position group and look at individual players in that position group, grade them as how I perceive them as a player, and then average out the position group. Obviously, stars would get a much bigger portion of that average in terms of how their rating was weighed in that calculation. And then I kind of meshed that into an overall rating based off of positional value. So those are kind of what I did. If you want more information about how I came up with my ratings for each team, let me know in the comment section below. I will be more than happy to share with you guys how I came up with these grades and ratings for each team. And without a further ado, let's get into it, starting with the Miami Dolphins. And with the Miami Dolphins, they were coming off really a disappointing season. They've been mediocre for really such a long time here, spending lots of money on bloated contracts for players that really did not live up to their contracts, trying to build around Ryan Tannehill for such a long time, who has been an average to below average player really for his entire tenure there with the Dolphins. So now they fire Adam Gase and they bring in Brian Flores, the defensive coordinator from the New England Patriots, trying to get some of that New England Patriots culture into the organization. And we'll see if it works out for them. It's clear that they need to go to a full-on rebuild, and that's exactly what they did when you look at what they did in free agency. Looking at some of the guys that they lost, obviously they moved on from Ryan Tannehill, trading him to the Tennessee Titans. And then they also lost Cameron Wake, who really has been a franchise cornerstone for this team for what seems like forever. It seems like ever since I've been following football that he's been a part of the Miami Dolphins. He's gone. He went to the Titans as well, signing a pretty big contract with them. They also lost starting right tackle Juwan James, who left for the Denver Broncos. Danny Amendola, who they signed last offseason, he went to the Lions in free agency. Frank Gore, who they signed, he's somehow still playing at a pretty decent level, but he left to go play for the Buffalo Bills. And then they lost Robert Quinn to the Cowboys. They kind of let him go after trading for him last offseason. And then another big blow for this team. They lost starting left guard Josh Sitton, who, for such a long time, he's been one of the best starting guards in football. He decided to finally hang up his cleats and retire. And since this team is rebuilding, they really didn't do much in terms of being aggressive in free agency, which is the smart move. I think, you want to decrease that cap hit to your team and start using that money on your own homegrown players going into the future. So it makes sense to not go out and spend a ton of money on bloated contracts like they have done for the past, I don't know how long, 5 to 8 years or so, that they've been stuck in this cycle of mediocrity. But they decided to make a change at quarterback, bringing in Ryan Fitzmagic, as we call him, 2 years, $11 million contract there. He's a guy that will compete for the starting position for this upcoming season. And then they signed Dwayne Allen at tight end, 2 years, $6.5 million from the New England Patriots. Bringing in more Patriots players, Eric Rowe, cornerback, on a 1-year deal. They brought in Alan Hearns, who was released by the Cowboys to compete for a wide receiver spot. Jordan Mills at right tackle from the Buffalo Bills to compete at right tackle. And then Chris Reed at guard on a 2-year deal to compete on the interior offensive line. Moving on from free agency, let's take a look at what they did in the draft. It was a pretty interesting draft for the Dolphins. In the first round, they drafted Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle out of Clemson, with the 13th pick. And Christian Wilkins has a chance to really be a difference maker for this franchise, not only this upcoming season, but as a leader of this defensive line going into the future. They really need to start getting some culture changers into this organization. And Wilkins, who was a 4-year player at Clemson and was a starter on that team for the last 3 seasons, he's one of the best leaders and one of the most fun guys to be around, I think, coming into the NFL for these rookies here. He's a guy that will make an impact right away. He maybe doesn't have the highest ceiling as some of the other highly touted defensive prospects in this draft class. This draft class was absolutely loaded on front 7 talent, but he's still going to be a very good player. And you're not necessarily drafting him to be an all-pro right away. You're drafting him to be a guy who can help change the culture in the right direction for this franchise. I thought that was the right pick for the Dolphins at the right time for them. And he's a very versatile player, which fits Brian Flores' defensive scheme, using multiple formations along the defensive line. And then in the second round, what they did, they didn't have a quarterback of the future. It was kind of assumed that they were going to tank this upcoming season and try and go for a guy like Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama on next year's draft. But they decided to make a move at quarterback, trading their second-round pick for Josh Rosen from the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that's a great risk to take for them. I'm not too high on Rosen personally. I just question his long-term potential as a franchise quarterback. But this guy was a first-round pick last season who the Arizona Cardinals traded up to get. He was highly touted coming out of high school and during college. It's definitely one of those things where you take a chance on him. You're only giving up a second-round pick for a potential franchise quarterback here. And if he works out, then you have your quarterback of the future. If he doesn't work out, it's not like you spent a first-round pick to go get him. So you can draft a quarterback high in next year's draft, because let's face it, Dolphins fans, this team is not set up to be very good this next year. So this will be another year for Rosen to hopefully earn a starting job here and hopefully start to develop a little bit, because he's been in some tough situations so far early in his NFL career. So you hope he can turn his career around here with the Dolphins. And then looking at what they did in the rest of this draft, they had huge need at offensive line going into the draft. And in the third round with the 78th pick, they decided to get Michael Dieter from Wisconsin, an offensive lineman who's going to play in the interior of the offensive line. In round 5, they got another Wisconsin player, Andrew Van Ginkel, linebacker. He's probably going to be more of a special teamer for this team, more depth at the linebacker spot. In round 6, they got an offensive tackle, Isaiah Prince from Ohio State. I'm not too high on him, but he can compete for right tackle alongside Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, and you're hoping he can earn a starting spot because their offensive line depth is really not good right now, and I'll get to that more in a bit. But then to kind of finish off their draft, in the 7th round, they got Chandler Cox, he was listed as a fullback for them. He was a running back out of Auburn, and Myles Gaskin, running back out of Washington, more of a receiving back, a guy that can do a lot of different things on third down for you. So overall, when I look at this team, the offense here really is a struggle overall. I have them rated as a below average to bad offense. I gave them a C- grade overall. And you can definitely see that when you just look across the board. This team does not have any standout players of note, but it all starts with the quarterback position. It's really interesting with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Josh Rosen competing for a spot. All reports indicate that Fitzpatrick is clearly ahead of Rosen in terms of the pecking order right now on the depth chart. That might change by the end of the year. Fitzpatrick, he will have a couple big games for you and go off for these 300, 400, multiple touchdown type of outings where you're thinking, oh, maybe he can be the starter for us, at least for this upcoming season, and we can win some games with him. And then he'll have some stinkers where he looks like the backup quarterback that he really should be at this point in his career. And once those games start to come in, if you're the Miami Dolphins, there really isn't a reason not to go to Josh Rosen. So I think Josh Rosen will play at some point this season. It really is just a matter of when. Then when you look at other spots in this offense, at the running back position, it's really interesting because all reports out of camp is that Kalen Ballage, who was a draft pick for them last season, has been really impressive in training camp so far. And he's going to be competing with Kenyon Drake, who isn't a guy that really has stood out overall in his NFL career. He's a guy who's very versatile in terms of being a pass catcher, and he'll make a big play once in a while. But he's not a guy that you're comfortable giving 15, 20 touches a game. That's just not his style as a running back. He really is just an average player, really, when you think about it. So if you look at Ballage, who's more of a bigger back, more of a powerful back than Kenyon Drake, it'll be interesting to see how that pecking order goes for the running back position and who will eventually take over as a starter for this team. We know Brian Flores coming from the Patriots. They value more of a power running game than the Dolphins have over the past few seasons. So you might go to Kalen Ballage, who can run some more of those power schemes that the Patriots like to run. And then moving on to the receiving positions, this is where things kind of get interesting because it's a big question mark whether they can really get anything out of some of the young weapons that they have on this team. And when you look at the depth chart here for them, obviously they have Kenny Stills, who's a deep threat specialist. Devontae Parker, you're still hoping to get something out of him. And then Albert Wilson, who actually turned out to be a decent signing for them last offseason. Definitely not great. He's still a bit overpaid. He's an average player to above average player, depending on the kind of day he's having. But it's really a big question mark on who's going to step up in this young receiving group here. Like I said, Devontae Parker, he really hasn't panned out at all as a first-round pick. Every year you keep on hearing about his potential, but he just never seems to put it together. They drafted Mike Gesicki, a tight end, last offseason in the second round. And tight ends usually take a while to really adapt to the NFL game. So you're hoping that Gesicki, in his second year here, in a Patriots system that values the tight end in the passing game quite a bit, you're hoping that he can use some of his freakish athleticism in the passing game to really take that next step and be a franchise cornerstone at the tight end position for this team going into the future. But he just didn't really have the opportunity to really show it off so much last season. Like I said, the tight end position is really tough to adjust to going into the NFL. And then you still have some explosive playmakers like Jakeem Grant, who he's not a great wide receiver necessarily. He's more of a guy that you get the ball to him in space, and he's really explosive in the open field. Bryce Butler's still around in this roster. Really nothing of note here. So really, this pass catching group for the Dolphins really is nothing impressive whatsoever. They're in a below average group overall. So you're just hoping that one of these guys can step up going into this next season. And then really the biggest weakness for this team on offense has to be their offensive line. Outside of Laramie Tunsil, who's really the only building block here, maybe Dieter, who they just drafted, but we'll see if he pans out or not. This may be the worst group in the NFL along the offensive line. Just going over who the projected starters are at this point. Obviously, you have Tunsil, you have Dieter. Daniel Kilgore is not a good center. Jesse Davis doesn't inspire much confidence, I don't think. And then at the right tackle position, you're either going to a sixth-round pick in Isaiah Prince or a veteran journeyman in Jordan Mills, who really hasn't been good. Early reports out of training camp are that he's lost his spot and that he's playing more second and third string at this point. We will see how that position kind of unfolds in the preseason, but overall, things are not looking good for the Miami Dolphins offensive line unit. They already fired their offensive line coach because he had a hard time installing the new scheme that they want to run here. And, yeah, you can blame the coach for that. I just think the Dolphins just have a terrible offensive line here to work with, and that they're going to be dealing with some major problems there all season long. So transitioning to the defense now. With the defense here, there's a lot more positives. I think their secondary is definitely the strength of this defense. It is actually a pretty good unit overall in the secondary when you look at it. Going to the cornerback position first, you have Xavier Howard, who is a rising star at the quarterback position, a long, rangy player who can lock you up on the outside. He had 7 interceptions last season. He's got great ball skills, and he just got a massive contract extension as well. He's a guy that is definitely a building block for this team. As a second rounder a few years back when he was drafted, he's been very impressive overall in the first couple seasons of his career. Xavier Howard definitely got to look out for. He could be a Pro Bowler, All-Pro type of player coming up soon. He's definitely an impact starter at this point, borderline high-impact starter who could really make some noise here in this upcoming season in 2019. And then look at the safeties. And the safety spot really is where the strength of this defense is. First, you have a Rashad Jones, who's been here for a long time in Miami. Very solid starter. He's an impact player for sure. He's very good tackling in the box. He's got maybe not the best range at the safety position, but he's got decent enough range and coverage skills at this point in his career to where he's definitely solid back there. And then they just drafted Minkah Fitzpatrick, who's basically like a Swiss Army knife for this defensive secondary. He can play a little bit of nickel corner. He can play free safety as the top guy in a cover 3, going sideline to sideline. He can do just a bunch of different things for you here, and the hope is that he can develop into the real star in this defensive backfield, similar to the way that Devin McCourty has been used for such a long time in New England. I'm sure Brian Flores will think of a lot of different ways to use Minkah Fitzpatrick this upcoming season. And then TJ McDonald, he's a solid, hard-hitting safety, more of a box safety at this point. Again, just a really solid player. Nothing spectacular, but he's a solid starter for this Miami Dolphins defense. And then you look at some of the other guys on this defense in the secondary at cornerback. Eric Rowe, who I just mentioned they signed. Bobby McCain, who is a pretty decent cornerback at this point in his career. They have some solid secondary depth here, and they should be pretty solid in pass coverage for this upcoming season. And then moving over to the front 7, you look at the linebackers. They're solid. They're nothing spectacular, but they're definitely not a terrible group overall. You start with Jerome Baker, who's going into his second season. They're definitely banking on him to take the next step up and be an impact starter for this team going into the future, a guy that they can build around in the front 7 of this defense at the linebacker position. He's a very athletic linebacker, can go sideline to sideline in the running game, and they're hoping that he can use that athleticism to be more of an impact player in coverage as well. And then you look at the other starters on this linebacking core. Kiko Alonso has been pretty solid, nothing spectacular for his career. And then Roquan McMillan, again, solid, not really spectacular, does his job pretty well. You're definitely not going to lose games because of this linebacking core. I will say that. They're a pretty decent unit. And I think Brian Flores will find a bunch of ways to kind of mix and match these guys. Like I said, they drafted Andrew Van Ginkel in the 5th round, so maybe he finds a role. I think he's more of a special teamer, like I said before. But the linebacking core is definitely far from the worst spot on this defense and on this team overall. But where the real weakness of this defense is the pass rush. They might have the worst pass rush in the NFL, and pass rush is just so important in today's passing league. They got rid of a bunch of pass rushers from last year, a bunch of veterans that took up a lot of snaps for them over the past few seasons. And the hope is that Charles Harris can finally step up to be the number 1 edge rusher that they drafted him to be 2 seasons ago. And he just hasn't gotten the opportunity really. Only 3 career sacks. Just hasn't been on the field a lot because they've had so many veteran players playing in front of him. It's kind of a detriment from the coaching standpoint of the previous Dolphins regime that, they got all these veteran players in there to, stock the depth chart and not give Charles Harris the chance to go out there and play and develop. But it's also kind of goes against Charles Harris here because he hasn't really proven much in practices and on the field to warrant any trust from the coaching staff to go out there and be that guy for them. So it's really tough here. It's just not a good pass rush overall, but the interior of the defensive line is good. Like I said, Christian Wilkins is a beast in the middle. He will be very good. They have guys like Vincent Taylor, Akeem Spence, Devon Godot, who's a solid defensive tackle for them. If they're going to get any pass rushes upcoming season, they need to get it from the interior because they will not get it from the edge. This is a very weak edge unit overall when you look at them. And really, Brian Flores, a defensive coordinator, that Patriots system, they don't really rely on edge pressure necessarily. They rely more on scheming and using multiple fronts to confuse offensive lines and quarterbacks to get pressure. But they also had a lot more talent in New England to kind of run those stunts. They don't have that here. So they're going to need someone to step up here and really be a nice contributor for the defense on the front four for this team. So going over to their schedule and what this team is going up against this next upcoming season, I think you can expect them to win between 2 to 5 games. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. They may surprise if some things go their way in terms of luck with injuries. Maybe a player steps up that, isn't expected to so early in the offseason here. But I think they're going to go 3-13. I'm pretty confident that they will go 3-13 among the worst teams in the NFL. I think they're doing the right thing starting this rebuild, but it's going to be tough for a few years here until they can establish their culture, until they can establish an offensive line, until they can get some pass rushers, and most importantly, until they get a true franchise quarterback. So moving on, let's go to the next team in the AFC to look at the New York Jets, who had a very eventful offseason to say the least. First off, they get a new head coach in here with Adam Gase, who, as opposed to Todd Bowles, who's a defensive-minded head coach, Adam Gase is an offensive head coach through and through. He's going to be considered kind of a quarterback guru, quarterback whisperer for this team to help out Sam Darnold. I will touch on more on that later, how I think it really was an uninspired hire, and I don't really like it as much. But let's get into the fun stuff for this team, what they did in free agency to kind of help boost this roster around Sam Darnold. And they were not afraid to spend big. Let's get to the big name, Le'Veon Bell, who they brought in on a 4-year, $52 million contract. He sat out the entire offseason last year to get this type of big payday, and he took a big risk doing it. I will not say that it did not really pay off for him that much. I don't think he got the money that I think he thought he was going to get. But still, $52 million, that's a pretty good payday for him. The Jets get a guy who can do a lot of different things in their offense and help out Sam Darnold here in Le'Veon Bell. And then on the defensive side, C.J. Mosley, linebacker from the Baltimore Ravens, one of the best inside linebackers in all football, 5 years, $85 million contract, big money being spent there. I think that's a bit of an overpay, if we're being honest here. I mean, that ranges to about $15 to $17 million per season, basically, here with that contract. And C.J. Mosley is a great player, don't get me wrong. But, yeah, that was a lot of money to spend on an off-ball linebacker. But nonetheless, he's an upgrade for that defense. He's going to be a leader for that front seven. And you're hoping that he can help change the culture here because Baltimore, they know how to draft and develop defensive players. And you're hoping that Mosley can be that building block guy for you in the back seven of your defense. And then they went to offense again to kind of help get some weapons in here for Sam Darnold, who desperately needs it. They gave a big contract to Jamison Crowder, a slot receiver from the Washington Redskins, 3 years, $28.5 million. That is a big overpay for a guy with average talent. I think the Jets would have been smarter to save that money and use it somewhere else, and then draft a guy in the 4th or 5th round who can give you similar production. Jamison Crowder is a guy who's going to get injured quite a bit, and he's very limited in what he can do for you on offense. But Adam Gase, I will say he's a creative offensive mind when it comes to using his receivers in a lot of different ways on shorter routes. So he will find ways to get Crowder involved in the short passing game, I think, and that's where his role will be as a slot receiver for this team. And then they also brought in Josh Bellamy from the Chicago Bears on a 2-year, $5 million contract. Bellamy won't get too many snaps, I don't think, as a wide receiver. He's going to be probably the number 4 or number 5 guy on this team. He's very good depth, and he's a great special teamer and a good leader in the locker room. I think the Jets are going to like that signing. They got him on a pretty good deal there. And they also brought him some depth on defense in the secondary as well, getting Brian Poole on a 1-year, $3 million contract. And then they need to support Sam Darnold on the offensive line as well. So they brought in Kachele Osemele, trading him for from the Oakland Raiders. They gave the Oakland Raiders a 5th-round pick in exchange for a 6th-round pick in this past draft. Definitely a good deal for them. You got to make those type of deals every single time to upgrade your offensive line. Osemele isn't the dominant player that he was a couple seasons ago, but he's still a highly impactful starting left guard in today's NFL, and he's an instant upgrade that kind of stabilizes the interior offensive line here. And then you look at who they lost in free agency. James Carpenter, who was their starting left guard for quite a bit. He went to Atlanta on a 4-year deal. They lost Buster Skrine, who's been their starting slot corner for the last couple seasons, to the Chicago Bears. They lost their kicker, Jason Myers, to the Seahawks. Starting center, Spencer Long, went to the Buffalo Bills. And then Morris Claiborne, who's been pretty solid for them the past couple of years at cornerback. He still isn't signed, so we'll see where he ends up. I'm sure some team will give him a call at some point once injuries start to come in for the defensive backfield. And then they also lost Josh McCown at the quarterback position, who decided to retire. Great veteran presence in the locker room for Sam Darnold last season, a guy who's basically like another coach, basically. And he might be a guy that they're going to miss. But if Sam Darnold's the guy, then I don't think it'll be too big of an issue. So moving on to what they did in the draft. This was an interesting draft for the New York Jets. You got to absolutely love what they did in the first round with the number 3 overall pick, with having Quinnen Williams basically fall right into their lap, defensive tackle out of Alabama. I thought he was the best player in this draft overall. Dude's absolutely dominant in the running game. He's dominant as a pass rusher. He's not Aaron Donald-esque. I think he's more of a Fletcher Cox type of player. He's very quick off the snap. He's big. He's strong. He's got great technique. And he's just a fun, energetic guy in the locker room. So I thought that was a home run pick for them. And him next to Leonard Williams, that is some serious pressure coming in the interior for opposing offenses to deal with. And then you look at the rest of the draft for them. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of what they did. Ja'Kai Polite in the 3rd round, an edge player out of Florida. I'm not a huge fan of him. I didn't really have that big of a grade on him. I thought he was more of a 4th, 5th round type of talent. Just didn't really see anything special from him out of Florida. Chuma Edoga, offensive tackle out of USC. He's very athletic. He can move his feet pretty well in pass protection. So you like his upside there. In the 3rd round, that might have been a bit too high, but offensive tackles were going a lot higher than what I projected them to be anyway, because so many teams are desperate to find even remotely serviceable offensive tackles in today's NFL. So I can't really hate the pick there, but he's a guy that's pretty raw. He needs to get stronger, and he's a guy that may not contribute right away in year 1, but they desperately need him to, because the offensive tackle depth is not very good on this team, and I'll get to that later. Later in the draft, in the 4th round, Trevon Wesco, tight end out of West Virginia. You're hoping he can develop as a solid weapon for Sam Darnold here. In the 5th round, Blake Cashman, linebacker out of Minnesota. I actually had a higher grade on him, 3rd round, 4th round type of guy. He's a guy that's been impressive in camp so far from the Jets, according to multiple reports. And, yeah, I like that pick for them. That's one of the other picks that I actually did like quite a bit for the Jets. And then the 6th round, Blessuan Austin, I don't really know how to spell his first name, cornerback out of Rutgers. He's a guy that, again, he competes for a cornerback spot. The cornerback room for the Jets is pretty weak in terms of depth right now. So you're hoping he can develop and contribute at some point. So overall, when you look at the offense here, the biggest question is Sam Darnold. Can he take the next step? Because as of right now, I have them rated as an average to maybe slightly below average offense. And it could go a long way for them if Sam Darnold can take the next step and be the franchise quarterback that I think he can be. He played very well in the last few games of the season last year, including that one against the Packers where he threw for over 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. He was very good in that game. But the biggest question for me and his development is Adam Gase, because I'm just not a huge fan of Adam Gase as just like this quarterback whisperer type that everyone keeps on selling him as. There's a reason that Miami was willing to fire him after 3 seasons. I honestly think he's overrated. He's a below average head coach overall. But I will say he is creative, and he will find ways in the passing game to help out Sam Darnold and create an offense that is best fit around his strengths and the strengths of the weapons that they have given him at the receiver position. And starting with that receiving position and some of the receivers and weapons they have on this team, it all starts with Le'Veon Bell, who will help immensely in the running game as just a pure inside zone runner, and in the passing game on screen plays, running routes out of the backfield, splitting out wide in the slot and out wide. He can do a variety of different things. I think Adam Gase will be very creative with Bell, a lot more creative than what the Steelers did with him. Bell is more of a traditional running back in Pittsburgh, and I know he caught a lot of balls in Pittsburgh, but generally in terms of where he lined up and the type of routes he ran, he was more of a traditional. It wasn't as creative as I think as they could have used him at Pittsburgh. And Gase is going to find multiple ways to use him in the passing game. That's going to be very fun to watch. But outside of Le'Veon Bell, when you look at the rest of this team here, they really only have average weapons on this team. I mean, Robbie Anderson, he's a great deep threat. He's starting to find his way and kind of develop into an impact wide receiver. He may not be a true number 1, but he's definitely a high-end number 2. Like I said, he's a really good deep threat down the field for Sam Darnold. And they had some great connections last season on some big plays in the passing game. Like I said, Jamison Crowder is going to be a slot guy. They overpaid for him, but he's definitely going to be able to contribute in the short passing game. Quincy Enunwa, who missed all of last season with a neck injury, you're hoping he can come back and be as good as he was before. He was an above-average starter for them when he was healthy, but man, I just don't know. He hasn't really shown much. Hopefully, he can be a much better player now that he's healthy. Like I said, Bellamy's still there, but overall, this receiving group just leaves a lot to be desired. Overall, you still have Deontay Burnett, who was a teammate of Sam Darnold at USC. So he's still there. Maybe he can contribute with his connection with Sam Darnold. They had some success with each other last season. And then at the tight end position, obviously, they drafted Trayvon Wesco in the draft. They're hoping they can get something out of him. And they also have Chris Herndon on the roster, and they brought in Daniel Brown from the Chicago Bears in free agency to kind of contribute for that third tight end spot. But really the hope is here that Chris Herndon can take the next step and be a nice, versatile weapon for them at the tight end position in the passing game. Unfortunately, he's going to miss the first 4 games of the season due to suspension. So you hope that he can come back and be productive for you. But for those first 4 games, there's going to be a lack of playmaking at the tight end spot for this team overall. But all that stuff doesn't really matter because when you look at the offensive line, I think similar to the Miami Dolphins, it really could be a huge problem. Obviously, Osemele, he's very good up front at the left guard position. I have no worries there, assuming that he stays healthy. Kelvin Beachum is all right at left tackle. You know, he's not great. He's not good, really, but he's not bad either. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be, pretty solid at left tackle. But outside of that, man, it is just really concerning for me when I look at this team. They did sign Matt Khalil, who just came out of retirement, but I don't really know how much he's got in the tank. There's a reason he retired in the first place. I mean, at center, they had Jonathan Harrison slated to start, and he's a backup for sure. Brian Winters, he's a borderline backup, really nothing spectacular as a starter. And then Brandon Shell at right tackle, I'm not a huge fan of that. I think he's a swing tackle at best. And if you're expecting him to be good in the passing protection, I just don't see it. Hopefully, Chuma Udoka can step up and really develop quickly because that will be a problem for this team in pass protection with the right tackle being able to defend elite edge rushers on the edges. So that could really be a huge problem for this offense and affect what Adam Gase will want to do with Sam Darnold. Thankfully, Sam Darnold is really good off schedule and making off schedule throws and avoiding pressure in the pocket. but you definitely want to make it as easy as possible for him now that he's still a second-year quarterback, learning a new system. You just want to be able to make things easy on him up front, and I just fear that the offensive line will not be able to do that and support Sam Darnold in this passing game. So going on from the offense, moving to the defense now, this is where the strength of this team is. The defense is definitely really promising overall. I have them rated as an above average defense only right now. They're pretty good as of right now at the C+ overall rating. And when you look at the strength of this defense, it really starts up front in the interior. Leonard Williams, Quinnen Williams, those guys are absolute beast up front. Williams, he hasn't really gotten the recognition or really put it all together yet in the NFL, but he's still a borderline dominant player up front. I wouldn't be surprised if he has a big year now that he doesn't have to be the number one priority for opposing offenses to double team on every single play, and he will be very good up front with Quinnen Williams there. This group on the defensive line could be even better than I project them to be, depending on how much both Williamses can develop next to each other. Those guys are going to be really good up front for this team for a long time and give opposing offenses headaches up front in the interior there. And then we look at the rest of the defensive line. Henry Anderson as a third starter in base packages and kind of switching him in and out for nickel packages as an interior pass rusher. He's a very solid player. I rated him as an above-average starter. He had a pretty good year last year when they traded for him from the Indianapolis Colts, and they extended him to a pretty decent contract as well. He's a good player, and yeah, he's definitely going to have a role on this defense, and he's going to make some plays throughout the season. And then they also have guys like Nathan Shepard, who's a nice young ascending talent. You're hoping he can contribute as well. Steve McClendon, who's very good in the running game as a nose tackle type. The defensive line is definitely set, and I have them rated pretty good right now at a grade of a B-, but this defensive line could be even better going to the season depending on how things work out for this team. This could be a real strength for this defense going into this season. And then you look at the back end of this defense. The safeties are really the strength of this defensive secondary. Jamal Adams, he's one of the best young safeties in all of football. Maybe not as good as Derwin James or Eddie Jackson, not quite there yet, but he's right up there in a tier below those guys. He's really good. He's a great leader for the defense. He's great. He's physical in the box. He can cover multiple positions. He can do just about everything you want out of your modern-day safeties. And then you combine him with Marcus May, who they drafted in the same draft class as him in the second round, who's also a pretty solid starter. The safeties are definitely a good spot to be in for them. And then look at C.J. Mosley, the linebacking core. He's going to be the leader of this defense. They also have, starting next to him, Avery Williamson, who's a pretty solid starter as well. And then, like I said, Blake Cashman, he's been impressing in camp. Maybe he can earn his way to get a role on this defense in nickel packages and dime packages. And maybe if there's an injury, I don't think he'll be too concerned with him coming in there as a second inside linebacker. But where the weaknesses are in this defense is at the edge position with the outside linebackers and their pass rush and at the cornerback spot. Let's start with the edge on the outside linebacker position. Jordan Jenkins, who's been a solid there for a long time, and Brandon Copeland, who's expected to start. I'm not high on either of them. I think they're both below average, replaceable starters, in my opinion. You're hoping, like I said earlier, with the draft portion that Ja'Kai Polite can develop and be a contributor for this defense and be a number one or number two pass rusher. And I really don't see it right now. Hopefully he can develop for this New York Jets defense because it would go such a long way in terms of generating some pressure. We know that Greg Williams, their defensive coordinator, is all about being aggressive and getting to the quarterback. And in order to do that, you want guys that can be able to win one-on-one matchups because he's going to want to blitz a lot. He's going to want to get into the opposing offense's face, and you need guys that can win one-on-one in the pass rush in order to do that. In the back end of the defense at cornerback, you have Tremaine Johnson, who he's overpaid. He should be making, that type of money for the quality of player he is. But he's still a pretty good cornerback. He's probably better off as a number 2 cornerback. But unfortunately, because there isn't that much depth behind him, he's going to be forced to be a number 1 cornerback for this defense. And when you look at the rest of the cornerback room here, it's really uninspiring. Dale Roberts is slated to start next to him. They brought in Brian Poole. And, yeah, it's just a weak group overall besides Trumaine Johnson when you really look at it. So looking at this defense overall, I have them rated above average. I think they can certainly work their way up and be a good defense by the end of the season. There are just a few holes here and there that really keep them from really making that next step for me, in my opinion. But there's definitely a good foundation set for this team to be good on defense. It really comes down to, I think, for the Jets this upcoming season, can Adam Gase's offensive scheme benefit Sam Darnold to the point to where he's playing at a franchise quarterback level and make that leap to prove he's a franchise quarterback? And can the big spending on all these free agents that they brought in really help generate some excitement and some buzz for this franchise as they hope to win some more games for this upcoming season? When you look at their schedule, there's definitely, I can see them winning as many as 8 games, but as low as 4 games. There's a very big window there in terms of what they can and will win on the season. Overall, I think when I look at the schedule, I think they're going to go 5-11. I think they're a year away, really, from making that step and pushing for a playoff spot. I think overall, at this point, you have to consider them a mediocre team, but they're definitely going to be a lot more competitive, and they're going to show some growth, hopefully, with Sam Darnold in that offense. So moving on, let's look at the Buffalo Bills here, who were definitely active in free agency. They still have a pretty solid coaching staff when you look at the Buffalo Bills here, led by Sean McDermott. And then when you look at what they did in free agency, last season was all about gaining their franchise quarterback in Josh Allen, and they made a bunch of moves this offseason to help support him on offense with pass catchers and offensive linemen to give him some protection. So you look at some of the moves they made. Mitch Morse, center from Kansas City, on a 4-year, $44.5 million contract. He's a good player. He'll help out immensely with the offensive line, I think. And then they made some interesting moves to try and boost the receiving core that I found pretty questionable. Cole Beasley on a 4-year, $20 million contract as a slot receiver, and then John Brown on a 3-year, $27 million contract to be their deep threat. And really, when I look at the contracts for both players, obviously it's an overpay. Neither of those guys are worth the value that they're going to be getting if they do end up staying on the team for the length of their contracts. But the positive side for that is that there is an out for each player after a season to where they don't have to spend all of that guaranteed money. So that's a positive. They can get out of those deals after a year. But yeah, it wasn't the greatest signings. I don't think they'll make too much of a difference when I look at this receiving core overall. But I'll get to that later. Let's look at the rest of their signings. Tyler Kroft, 3-year, $18.75 million deal. Again, a bit of an overpay. He's a solid starter, but he's not making a huge difference, I don't think. And then they went back to the offensive line. Spencer Long on a 3-year, $12.6 million deal. They got him from the Jets. He was their starting center for the Jets last season. He's going to transition to guard and be the right guard for this team. At least that's what it's projected to be. And then Lee Smith, tight end, on a 3-year, $9 million contract. He's going to contribute, hopefully, as a number 2 tight end for this team, more of a blocking tight end. And then E.J. Gaines, bringing him on a 1-year deal at the cornerback position. He's probably going to play in the slot for them. And then they brought in Frank Gore on a 1-year deal, who can add some power and a veteran presence to the running back room. And they really didn't lose too much when you look at this free agency period. Obviously, Kyle Williams, defensive tackle, losing him to retirement is a big loss. He was really the rock of that organization for such a long time. and they're going to miss him immensely on the defensive line. But he was a good player for a long time, great leader for them. But when you look at the other losses, Charles Clay, tight end, lost him to the Cardinals. Man, he was a good tight end. Nothing spectacular, though. He's really just a solid starter. You can replace him. And then Jordan Mills, offensive tackle, lost him to the Dolphins. That's not a huge loss. He's not really good at pass protection. He's all right in the run blocking game, but you can definitely replace him there. And then when you move on from free agency to the draft, I actually liked quite a bit what the Buffalo Bills did here. First off, in the first round, Ed Oliver falls into their lap. Like I said, this is a loaded defensive class, so some of these guys that should have been top 3 or top 5 picks in other drafts, they're dropping to mid-level first-round picks, and that's what Ed Oliver is. In any other year, he'd probably be an elite prospect, and you're getting him at the 9th overall pick. Just crazy. He's going to be an instant impact starter for this team up front. He's probably the closest thing you'll see in terms of a prospect to Aaron Donald. Now, I don't think he's going to be Aaron Donald. Nothing close to that. But as an undersized, super quick, super athletic interior pass rusher, he's going to be an absolute terror for all these teams in the AFC East for a long time. Very good player. Love that pick for him. They got their franchise quarterback last year. Now they get their franchise pass rusher on the defensive side of the ball. In the second round, they add some help on the offensive line, getting offensive tackle Cody Ford to compete for the right tackle spot out of Oklahoma. And he's a big physical tackle, solid length. They might move him to guard possibly. We'll see how this offensive line works out for them. But I thought that was a solid pick. I don't think he's spectacular or anything like that, but I definitely think he can be a starter at the NFL level. And then they had a bunch of picks in the third, fifth, sixth, seventh round. They made a lot of moves basically to get a lot of picks. And when you look at the third round, Devin Singletary, running back out of FAU, he's very shifty. Doesn't really have any breakaway speed. He's kind of undersized, but he's kind of like a poor man's LaShawn McCoy. And when you already look at LaShawn McCoy being on the roster, that's a good trick. That's a good pick they had because LaShawn McCoy is probably going to be gone after this next upcoming season. He's getting up there in age. Devin Singletary has a very similar skill set in terms of being a shifty guy at the running back position for you. And then later in the third round, they got Dawson Knox, tight end out of Ole Miss. You're hoping that he can develop into something. I'm not too high on him, but we'll see how that works out. In the fifth round, Vosean Joseph out of Florida at the linebacking position. Probably going to be just some depth, special teams value. Same for in the sixth round, Jaquan Johnson, safety out of Miami. He's got some interesting athletic traits that you hopefully can develop, but again, he's probably going to be just a depth guy and contribute on special teams. And then the seventh round, Daryl Johnson as a defensive end edge player out of North Carolina A&T. Maybe you can get something out of him as a pass rusher. And Tommy Sweeney, another tight end out of Boston College. So they brought in a lot of tight ends in this offseason to compete and hopefully help out Josh Allen here at the quarterback. And when you look at this offense as a whole, I have them graded out as, yet again, an average to below average offense. I gave them a C grade. And this could change depending on how much Josh Allen grows as a player. He definitely showed some promising moments last season. He showed some flashes. He's not a consistent passer yet. He needs some more help in the passing game with receivers and the offensive line being better. Now, I loved Josh Allen coming out of the draft last season. I had him as my number one quarterback. His talent is through the roof. If he can put it all together, he could be absolutely an elite quarterback in this league, but he is still very raw and he has to get better on some of the short timing stuff. The accuracy is definitely a concern. So hopefully you get to see more of a growth for him, a big boost in his second season here. And while they brought in some guys like Cole Beasley and John Brown to help him out in the passing game, I don't think that was enough. So we'll see if they're able to scheme their way out of what really is a mediocre pass catching group at best. They spent big money on their offense to help improve it, and it's going to be tough. Mitch Morse, though, that was a good signing to hopefully improve that offensive line. That was good. That was really good for them. And then when you look at the offensive line, Deion Dawkins at left tackle, he's solid. He's going to be a contributor for you. He's a young left tackle, and I don't think he's going to be like a Pro Bowler or anything like that, but he's a guy that is a pretty steady presence for you at left tackle. So hopefully with all these moves being made to help Josh Allen in this offense, that you start to see some growth and improvement there. On the defensive side of the ball, this is where the strength of the team is. Now, you may be surprised at how low I kind of rated them, because last year they were statistically a top 5 defense, and I only have them rated as an above average unit. And a lot of that might be just due to the fact that I don't see any game-breaking superstars on this unit. And Sean McDermott, as a coach, did a good job of getting the most out of these guys last season. But there definitely is some upside on this defense to where this team can turn into a good defense and maybe even a great defense by the end of the season. And when you look at the standout players on this team, Micah Hyde at safety, Tre'Davious White, one of the best young corners in all of football, definitely a high-impact starter for them. Jordan Poyer at the other safety spot, Lorenzo Alexander, the NFL's version of Benjamin Button, who gets better as he ages, it seems like. Jerry Hughes, a very underrated pass rusher along the defensive line. Matt Milano is a pretty solid off-ball linebacker. There's a lot of good players on this defense, and they play very well together. Unfortunately for them, I don't really see any game breakers or superstars, though. So you're hoping that guys like Tre'Davious White, who showed some flashes to be a shutdown corner earlier in his career, that he could take that next step. Micah Hyde can continue to be excellent. And then obviously the first-round pick at Oliver, if he can step up and be a truly dominant force on the defensive line, that will go a long way for this team. They do have, when you look at some of the strengths of this team, their defensive line is going to be good at stopping the run. You have Harrison Phillips, who's a third-round pick out of Stanford, who kind of will replace Kyle Williams. He kind of has a similar build and play style to him. Star Lotulelei, who they signed last offseason as a nose tackle, run-stopping guy. He's a decent player, nothing spectacular, but ultimately you hope that Tremaine Edmonds, who they traded up for last year in the first round, can develop as an inside linebacker. I was really high on him last offseason in the draft. I think he can be an absolute superstar as their middle linebacker. He was a little bit raw coming out of Virginia Tech, but hopefully with a year under his belt and an offseason as the guy at the middle linebacker spot, hopefully he can be a superstar for this defense. And if he does, then this defense is going to be absolutely awesome, I think, this upcoming season and going into the future. They definitely have a high ceiling now that they have a cornerstone at Ed Oliver on the defensive line. So when I look at the schedule for the Buffalo Bills, it's going to be interesting. I think this team definitely is better than last season, but not really significantly better. They're still a mediocre team overall, but I think they can win anywhere from 4 to 7 games looking at the schedule. I predict that they go 6-10 this season, which is a similar record to what they did last season. I get it, but it's not about the wins and losses, I think, for this team this upcoming season. It's all about Josh Allen and some of the strides that he makes for this team going into the future. So moving on to the final team in the AFC East for this NFL preview video, the New England Patriots, the defending Super Bowl champions. Let's look at what they did in free agency. Obviously, they had a lot of talent that they lost in this offseason. Rob Gronkowski, that's the big one, the first ballot Hall of Famer. He finally decided to hang it up, the cleats, and retire. That's a huge loss because I'll get to it later, but their tight end group is now very scarce of talent now without him. And then Trey Flowers and Trent Brown, losing those guys to the Lions and Raiders respectively to huge, massive contracts. Those guys were really the cornerstones of their teams their team last season on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Trent Brown, who developed into one of the better left tackles last season, even though he got overpaid. Obviously, he's not quite on that level, but he was very good last season as a contributor. And then Trey Flowers, who was a versatile chess piece for Bill Belichick to use on the defensive line. Really the closest thing that they had to a superstar talent on this team. Now he's gone. So what can you replace him with here? And it was interesting what the Patriots did. They brought in Michael Bennett from the Philadelphia Eagles. They traded away a 5th-round pick in exchange for a 7th-round pick in the 2020 draft to go get him. That's a good move for them because Trey Flowers, he had the flexibility in Bill Belichick's defensive scheme to be able to be both an outside guy and an interior pass rusher in sub packages. And Michael Bennett can kind of do the same thing, where he's going to be kind of a 4-3 defensive end on base downs, on first downs, and running situations. And then when they need him to be more of a pass rusher, they're going to kick him inside to the defensive tackle spot, and he's just going to terrorize opposing offensive guards and centers to bring an interior pass rush to opposing offenses. And then they bring in Mike Pennell from the Jets, more of a run-stopping defensive end on a 2-year, $5 million contract. Good, cheap player there. Benjamin Watson, they got him out of retirement from the New Orleans Saints at tight end on a 1-year deal. You're hoping that he can contribute. He was with the New England Patriots over a decade ago, and you're hoping that his connection with Tom Brady is enough to where he can give you some production there. Obviously, that's a big step down from Gronkowski. And then some of the other moves they made. Demaryius Thomas, wide receiver on a 1-year deal from the Houston Texans. Unfortunately, he's coming off a torn Achilles, so you really don't know, one, when he's going to be back, and two, how good he's going to be when he gets back. So that's a huge question mark, but they need to add something in the receiving core because they're scarce on weapons right now at the wide receiver position. And then Jamie Collins, they brought him back to be some depth at the off-ball linebacker spot on a 1-year deal. He was a starter for the Browns the past couple seasons after the Patriots traded him there. Didn't really work out. Wasn't worth the big contract that he got. But now that Bill Belichick has him back with the Patriots, you're hoping that he can kind of resurrect his career and get back to where he was before, where he was one of the young, up-and-coming linebackers in the game a few years ago. We look at other losses that this team had. Malcolm Brown, defensive tackle, leaving for the Saints. He was a big force for them up front in terms of the run defense. Not much of a pass rusher, but he was very good at stopping the opposing running game. Cordell Patterson, leaving for the Bears. He was kind of a gadget guy, one of the best returners in all of football. You lose that explosive element in your offense. Again, he wasn't a great receiver or anything like that, but you can do a lot of different things with him on your offense in terms of being creative with your scheme. Eric Rowe, you lose some cornerback depth there, leaving for the Dolphins. And then Chris Hogan, who was pretty productive for them, but he kind of showed last season that he just doesn't have the ability to separate anymore. He leaves for the Carolina Panthers in free agency. So a lot of moving parts now for the New England Patriots in free agency. And then when you look at what they did in the draft, in the first round, they got N'Keal Harry, wide receiver out of Arizona State. I'm not super high on him, but he's a bigger wide receiver. And that seems to be the trend with what the Patriots are going for in their wide receivers now, where they want bigger guys that can make contested catches and not necessarily separate from defenders, but make it easier for Tom Brady to make throws to guys that can make those tough catches in traffic and really help out their quarterback as he starts to age. And then look at the rest of their draft. In the second round, Jawan Williams, cornerback out of Vanderbilt, a big, lengthy corner who's going to be more of a matchup corner. I didn't really have that high of a grade on him in the second round, but Bill Belichick, he loves getting depth at corner, and he loves matchups at the quarterback position. He doesn't really view it as a pecking order at the quarterback spot, more of what are the best matchups and who are the best guys to match up against what the opposing offenses do best. So that's what Williams is going to contribute there for the Patriots. And then in round 3, I thought they got the most classic Patriots pick in Chase Winovich, outside linebacker, edge player out of Michigan. He's the prototypical Patriots drafted player, I think. Damian Harris, running back out of Alabama. Again, they're going more to an old school power running game, and Harris fits that like a glove. More running back depth for them because Sony Michel, he does struggle to stay healthy. So you're hoping that Damian Harris can step in and contribute there. Yandy Kajust later in the third round, offensive tackle out of West Virginia. He's a guy that can contribute as a swing tackle right now. They lost Trent Brown. And now Isaiah Wynn is going to be the projected left tackle for them. You're hoping that Kajust can step up there and be nice depth and maybe eventually develop into a starting level player. Later in the draft, they got more offensive line depth in Hajalte Froholt, offensive guard out of Arkansas. They got a quarterback to kind of develop for the future in the fourth round in Jared Stidham, quarterback out of Auburn. So he was a guy that a lot of people were higher on going into last college football season, but he really did not play well last year at all. But he does have some high upside with his athletic and physical traits. Later in the draft, in the fifth round, Byron Coward, defensive tackle out of Maryland. He's kind of a versatile type of player along the defensive line. The Patriots absolutely love those type of players. So maybe he can develop into a rotational piece for this team. And then Jake Bailey, punter out of Stanford, to compete for that spot. And then the seventh round, more quarterback depth. Ken Webster, quarterback out of Ole Miss. So an interesting draft for the Patriots. They did a lot of trades, a lot of wheeling and dealing, a lot of moving up and down the draft board. So you got that going for them there. And then when you look at where they are as a team, as an offense, starting with them specifically, I think this is a pretty good offense. But it's not one of those new school modern offenses that you see now where they're going to be high flying and going up and down the field in the passing game. This is definitely an old school type of offense that is going to rely on a power running game. And they're going to try and take the ball out of Tom Brady's hands as much as possible. As weird as it is to say, because Tom Brady, as great as he is, he's the greatest quarterback of all time. But there are some legitimate questions as to whether Tom Brady can continue to play at a high level as he goes into his age 42 season. He showed some signs of decline last year, especially for the middle portion of the season where it just seemed like he was just off in so many different ways. Now, he did have some struggles with receivers last season because they definitely struggled to separate. They struggled to make contested catches, and they just weren't on the same page as him throughout the season. But when you look at the receivers right now, I just don't see how that really changes. Obviously, you still have Julian Edelman, who's going to be the top target in the slot, and James White out of the backfield. James White's one of the best receiving backs in all of the NFL, and Julian Edelman still is one of the best slot receivers in the entire NFL. And you saw that in the Super Bowl last season where he was really the only guy for them that could get open consistently. But when you look at this offense, Gronkowski is such a huge loss for this team. He really was a huge part of their identity as an offense over the past 8 or so years. And you look at it where the Patriots love to use their tight ends in the passing game. You look at their group now, they might have one of the worst groups in football at the tight end position. When you look at the depth chart right here, it's not really promising. Ben Watson is going to probably be the starter, but then you got Matt LaCosse, Steven Anderson, Lance Kendricks. It's just very uninspiring. So I think what the Patriots are doing here, that they brought in more of an emphasis on bigger wide receivers, is they're going to put less of an emphasis on tight ends in the passing game and replace their role as mismatch problems with bigger receivers with guys like Demaryius Thomas and N'Keal Harry playing more in the spot of where the tight ends would in the passing game. So the tight ends will focus more on blocking, and then you'll see N'Keal Harry and bigger receivers like that contribute more as their mismatch nightmare type of guy in the passing game. But like I said earlier, Demaryius Thomas, that's still a complete unknown due to the Achilles. You don't know when he's going to be back. You don't know how effective he'll be. If he can get on the same page as Tom Brady when he does get back, that's a huge question. And they really need someone to step up in that wide receiving room because other than Julian Edelman, I mean, N'Keal Harry's a rookie. And then behind him, there really just isn't a lot. I mean, you still got Philip Dorsett as a deep threat. Dontrell Inman was a solid pickup, I thought. He's nothing special, but he can definitely contribute, I think, going forward. But at the end of the day, I just don't see it. There has been talk out of Patriots camp that Maurice Harris from the Washington Redskins, who they picked up, has been the best receiver by far so far for this Patriots team. So maybe he has a role. Maybe he can be a guy that Tom Brady can rely on. But the skeptic in me says that if you're relying on Maurice Harris to be your number one threat outside of Julian Edelman in the passing game, then your receiving core may not be very good. So I have some definite questions there overall. But that's fine, because the strength of this Patriots team will not be the receivers. It will be the running game. They have one of the best offensive lines in all of football. Outside of Isaiah Wynn, who coming off an Achilles tear last season will finally take over as a starting left tackle for this team. You got Joe Tooney, who's been a mainstay left guard. David Andrews, one of the best centers in football. Shaq Mason at the other guard spot, one of the best right guards in all of football. And Marcus Cannon is still a very good starting right tackle. And you know Dante Scarnecchia as their offensive line coach. He's one of the best, if not the best, in all of football at coaching up offensive lines. You know that this team is going to be very, very good by the end of the season. I know I have them rated maybe a little bit lower than some of you may think. I think they will be among the best offensive lines when it's all said and done by the end of this season. But there are still some questions with Isaiah Wynn and whether he can step up and be a franchise type of left tackle. So that's really where the kind of grade kind of dropped for me. But there is a lot of upside here. And I think by the end of the season, some of my concerns with that will definitely be subsided just a little bit, I think. And then look at the running backs. You have Sony Michel, who's an absolute beast in the playoffs last year. I already mentioned Harris, who kind of adds similar game to Sony Michel as a power guy in between the tackles. And then you got Rex Burkhead there. And then you got a fullback in James Devlin who could do a bunch of different things for you on offense. This team is set up to win games playing old school ground and pound football with Tom Brady supporting the team on play action passes to get big chunk plays in the middle of the field with bigger wide receivers. So that's kind of where I see this offense going. It's definitely a good offense, but not in kind of the more modern way that we think of right now, more of a old school type of fashion offense. And so when you move on to this defense here, and I look at them here, you might think I have them a bit rated lower than you might expect, especially the way they played in the playoffs this last season, where they absolutely dominated the Rams and the Chargers and held their own against the Chiefs for the most part, especially in the first half. But when I look at this group, they lose a guy like Trey Flowers, who was the closest thing they had to a true superstar type of player. And now they just have a bunch of solid, but not really spectacular guys, especially up front on the defensive line for this defense. But that's really nothing different from what Bill Belichick has done with his defensive fronts for really his entire career as a coach here at the New England Patriots. They don't really rely on elite pass rushers to get after the quarterback. They like having bigger defensive linemen to be able to put all their resources on defense into coverage, and then they can scheme up ways with different stunts and different coverages and different front packages to put some pressure on opposing quarterbacks. So you look at this defensive line, you have guys like Lawrence Guy, Pennell, who I already mentioned, Danny Shelton, a big run-stuffing nose tackle. All those guys are great run defenders, and they really rely on those guys to hold their own, maintain double teams, and just make it easier for their linebackers and defensive backs to fly around back there in the back seven. And then in order to get a pass rush, they need guys like Michael Bennett, Chase Winovich to offer some versatility and do a bunch of different things for them, moving all over the formation and getting some pressure from all over the place, either on the edge or from the interior. They definitely have some guys now where they can do a bunch of different things, which is what Bill Belichick loves to do. And then you also got guys like Deatrick Wise, Derek Rivers. Those guys can contribute as well and have an impact on this defense. And then looking at the back seven, the linebackers and the secondary, this is where the strength of this defense is. Look at Dante Hightower as a versatile, do-it-all type of linebacker for them. Stephon Gilmore, one of the best cornerbacks in all of football, quickly emerged this past season. Had an all-pro year, was absolutely awesome in the Super Bowl for them. Look at the McCourty brothers, Devin McCourty and Jason McCourty. Those guys are both impact starters for this team. And then Patrick Chung, Kyle Van Noy, two very solid guys who just do their role and execute what Bill Belichick asked them to do. So there is a lot of talent in the back seven of this defense, especially at the quarterback spot. They have really good depth at quarterback. And like I mentioned earlier, Bill Belichick, it's not really a designed, designated depth chart. It's more of a let's find the best matchups and match up our quarterbacks based off of that. So whoever gets playing time is really going to be based off of matchups more than anything. And they have a lot of depth here where they can afford to do that. You look at J.C. Jackson, Jonathan Jones. Both of those guys are more than capable of being starting quarterbacks on any other teams. And for this team, they're just going to be role players. So Bill Belichick can do a lot of things with these guys and throw around different dime packages to match up against any opposing offense that goes in his way there. So this is a classic Bill Belichick defense, not as talented as some of his other groups, but they should be pretty effective nonetheless. So when you look at the Patriots here and their schedule, I see them winning anywhere between 11 and 13 games. There's not as much upside on this team as maybe past years, but I think you would be foolish to not think of this team as a Super Bowl contender. As long as they have Bill Belichick and Tom Brady still playing at a pretty high level, they're going to be in the mix at the very end of the season like they always are. The AFC East really doesn't have much to contend with them. So I think that this division definitely comes down to New England Patriots winning it once again. I think they go 12-4 this upcoming season, and it should be another good year for the New England Patriots. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on the AFC East, kind of previewing them going into this NFL season. I'm very excited to do the rest of these videos and start focusing on some of these other teams in the NFL for preview videos. But if you like what you guys saw and you like the content that I'm producing, make sure to give a like and subscribe in the comment section below. I will be updating on Twitter, so follow me on Twitter. I'll post my account in the description below as well. And I will also have some of my reasoning and some of my designations for grades in the comment section below if you guys want to take a look at that as well. But overall, I had a lot of fun making this video. So if you like what you saw, you like my content, please subscribe and look forward for the NFC East to be the next video. I'll be doing them in my next video. So thanks, guys, for watching.